Hello, welcome to Archaeological. Today we're going to cover a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is the religion of heathenry, of which I'm a practitioner. Specifically, we're going to cover a subject in heathenry today called Folkism, which is a rather controversial and very racist ideology within heathenry, wherein only white Northern European descended people can follow heathenry, which is wrong and totally invalid. Now, many of my fellow heathens have already made videos on this subject, specifically on how this is an invalid practice, specifically Ocean Keltoy, Wolf the Red, and Wind in the World Tree, all of whom's videos I will link in the iCard. However, today I want to cover a section of it that I don't think has been covered at all, or even if it has, not very adequately, and that is how valid is it within the archaeological record, something I specialize in. So when we do this, we're going to go through the Viking Age and all the way back, and the reason I'm going to do that is because there's this idea within folkism and theodism, another problematic ideology within heathenry, that we need to go back to the arch-heathen ways, as if they're somehow the Archangel Michael, which is very much a Christian holdover. But, you know, the idea is that, you know, we have to go back to the most pure heathen practices we can. And the issue with that is, how do you quantify that? How do you say what is the original, especially within the Indo-European sphere of religions, which are rather broad in on themselves, of which heathenry and Germanic cultures reside in. So without ado, we're going to go look through that and decide how much they are valid. So, okay, so is folkism valid? Archaeology edition. Well, you can already guess based on my introduction my feelings on this. So let's see what their archaeological record says. Well, it says quite a lot. You can see here on the screen a sketch of the now infamous Burka Woman burial. What this burial tells us, aside from women could be warriors and often were warriors back then, sorry bigots, deal with it, is that she was garbed in outfits that are very indicative of steppe culture, that is nomadic horse culture from the Eurasian steppes of Mongolia and Siberia. And this makes sense because as Sweden was moving into what is now modern day Russia and Bulgaria and the Ukraine, they came in contact with early Turkic horse nomads and had exchanges of culture quite a bit, and even through them had cultural contacts with East Asia, which can be seen in things such as the Oestigaard and Helga Buddhas, which I'll show up in a minute. Now, a lot of focus who are listening here is like, oh, well, adoption of, you know, clothes from another culture doesn't mean anything. Well, if you're going to say that, you know, then you have to say, you know, have to ask everything else, because usually culture, like via clothes and religion, go hand in hand, and so does cultural mixing. So if you're going to say, oh, you know, it means nothing because it has no effect on our religion, why not? I mean, and besides, even if it doesn't, it's still mixing of a culture in itself, which already says fuck you to focus ideologies about not mixing of cultures. Which brings us to the Helga Buddha on the left and the a ring found with what is called Pseudo Kufic writing on the right. Now, Buddha is interesting because we know that through isotopic dating that it comes all the way from Pakistan. Now, I'm not saying Norse or Vikings or whatever went all the way to Pakistan, but it does show how wide their trade networks went. And it's interesting that this was found in a burial, which it could have been easily a trade good that was simply buried, but it could also have been an idea, whether it be philosophical or religious, that the individual had with them. And then, in another light, an idea of mixing cultures and emulating other cultures that was common in the Scandinavian mindset at the time, and even broader Germanic mindset at the time, was to emulate higher cultures. And I don't mean that the Scandinavians were barbarians by any stretch of the matter, but they did, try to emulate other cultures, which is seen in this ring to the right that, as I said, bears Pseudo Kufic. And what this means is, well, it's in essence gibberish and means nothing, at least as far as people can tell. At one point in time, it's thought to say for Allah or something like that, but has since been decently debunked. But what it is they try to emulate the Arabic world, because at the time the Arabic world was the gold standard of civilization other than the Byzantine Empire. It was the wealthiest area, had the best life expectancy rates, everything. So of course, why wouldn't you want to emulate these people? But okay, I hear you, Focus. One ring doesn't mean anything. Well, what we have right here is a dirham from the grave of Alpha, and the grave that Sutton Hoo, the person who was buried in Sutton Hoo, we found this dirham where it has Pseudo Kufic on it. So it wasn't just in Scandinavia, it was also in Anglo-Saxon England. So we have, and these are just two examples. In the links, in the comments, I'll link the sources for these. But so this still shows that Scandinavians at the time were still trying to emulate other cultures and mixing with other cultures. So no, they would not have, there was not at the time this idea of we have to stay pure, or we can only practice Northern European culture and they can only practice Muslim culture or Byzantine culture. Not at all. We can see that in the Burka grave with her outfit, and in these dirhams, and even in the Buddhas found in Togo and the Oestigaard. But okay, well, this is the Viking Age, not necessarily art heathens by their standards. Well, we can see a similar trend as we go back to the migration era, and how we see that is in these migration era pendants. So first, you see a trend in the migration era of Scandinavia, a trend of copying Roman pendants called bracate. I may have butchered that, but to emulate who at the time was the highest standard of civilization other than the Sassanid Empire in Persia. So of course they wanted to look wealthy and elite and everything, and so they started copying this. Then roughly, and that was before the migration era, then roughly around the 370s, the group who we are familiar with called the Huns arrived. And of course, we're all aware of the brutality and horror they brought to much of Europe. But despite that, we see a trend, archaeologists as a whole have seen a trend where Scandinavians seem to have begun copying their old Roman Burkatai with steppe culture motifs, Hunnic motifs such as longer hair, something that wasn't seen in Roman pendants, and horses with antlers at the top, as seen in the pendant at the top, which is a very common steppe motif going all the way back to the Bronze Age with the Scythians. So, okay, were they were they just doing this for an aesthetic, or were they, adopting a culture? It's hard to tell, but it's pretty clear that it wasn't, just, oh, here's a gold pendant they found. They tried to emulate these cultures as best as they could. And that, at least to me and to other archaeologists, shows that they were copying and emulating these cultures, which again spits in the face of what Folkists are trying to say. After all, why would you try and emulate another culture if you wanted to stay pure and only do your culture? Why would you, wear pendants of artwork of another culture if only your culture is the best? Yeah, so I mean, again, not very good, not very good investigative work on the Folkists. But again, okay, well, that's only the migration era, not exactly our heathenry. Well, we go back to Tacitus in the 100s. Now, of course, this is not based on archaeological data. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. But Tacitus, in his work Germania, mentions several tribes in roughly this area, the border of Germania and the Roman Empire, who had beliefs that they were both Celtic and Germanic. Now, he personally believed that they were not telling the truth, but Tacitus isn't always, in his source, the most unbiased source, to say the least. However, that still provides us with important information on what cultural ties were viewed as at the time and how fluid cultural identity was. So you could be both Celtic and Germanic. And he even talks about a tribe in an island to the northeast of the European continent, maybe Scandinavia. It could be Britannia, but he knew what Britannia was at the time, so why he would call it something else wouldn't make any sense. So we're going to go with Scandinavia. But he describes that this tribe in Scandinavia spoke Germanic, but dressed like they were Britons, like they were Britannians, like they were, Celts. So again, there we have this fluid definition of what is German and what is Celtic. So, what do we take that as? And I say that, we take it for what it is. There wasn't really always a good marker for what was Germanic or not, which again spits in the face of what Folkists are going to say, and as it should. But hey, is that still our heathenry? I mean, is it really? Well, it depends on your definition. Some Folkists I've had conversations with have said that this is our heathenry. However, they're ignoring two very big parts of Germanic history. The first is the Nordic Bronze Age. So what we have here on the left is a grave dating to the Bronze Age found in Denmark. And what was interesting about this grave is several glass beads and copper beads were found, and using isometric dating analysis were found to come from Egyptian workshops. Now, not all of them, a great many of them were from Denmark, but so were a great many of them from Egypt. And this matches up very well with other aspects of the time, and that is a great Bronze Age trade network at the time, where, as in this map in the right corner shows, amber and other things, but timber and such, would move south, and north would move, in exchange for that, would move copper, and then tin would move from Britain to Scandinavia in return for amber and other things. And it's, you can see this proof of this interaction in a lot of things. Copper axes in Scandinavia that have been, isotopes are showing it coming from Cyprus and the Carpathian Mountains, and Spain. You have rock carvings that show what can be described as sunboats that look like the sunboats of Mycenaean and New Kingdom art that didn't exist before this trade network was started. So we see this, just this idea of trade and then cultural exchange, which often comes with trade. Which, I can hear Folkis saying, oh, but trade doesn't mean anything. Okay, well, like I said, I mentioned, an exchange of ideas like the sun boats. Well, one of those exchange of ideas were Bronze Age swords. On the far left are drawings of Bronze Age swords found in Danish graves. And they show clear influence from the Bronze Age swords in the middle that were from Mycenaean Greek graves. And that just doesn't happen out of nowhere. I mean, well, that's not true. I will say that there is something called independent development that archaeologists do know about. So just because something looks similar doesn't always mean it is the same. So I will say that as an archaeologist, looking at you, ancient aliens and Atlantis believers. But this is one of those cases where we do have proof of exchange. And again, that goes back to the bronze that has been, sourced to Cyprus. Not only that, but, like I said, rock carvings of oxide ingots that are indicative of Mycenaean and other Mediterranean trade. And then on the far right, the sun boat. Again, something that doesn't show up in Scandinavian rock art until this trade between the Mediterranean opens. And it's, been seen in a whole lot of places during the Nordic Bronze Age when this trade began to open. And yes, again, independent development could be a thing. However, adding all the evidence, the Egyptian glass beads, the bronze swords, the oxide ingots, everything together, it's much more likely that this was some sort of cultural exchange. And we can even see this sun boat in what is called the Nebra sky disk. Now, there has been some debate whether or not this Nebra sky disk actually dates to the Bronze Age or to the Iron Age, and I will link both papers in the comments about the back and forth about this debate. I personally feel that the side that thinks it's from the Bronze Age has the more sound arguments, but I'll let you decide for yourself. But regardless of whether or not it comes from the Bronze Age, it has that sun wheel at the bottom. And it looks very similar in shape to the one on this page. So again, we have not just trade, we have cultural exchange. And cultural exchange doesn't happen if you have this idea of purity and you have to keep everything in your religion and culture 100% yours. And even that whole idea doesn't make sense, because if we go back to the furthest archaeism we can get before going to the Stone Age, the Indo-European expansion, we see things like this. Indo-European horse veneration and horse sacrifice. which is such as seen in this tomb from Kufic, Sweden, but also seen as far east as India and Mongolia, and as far south as the Hittites in Anatolia. The Hittites were were an Indo-European culture. They were among the first to actually break off. The second being the Mongolian Afanassievo culture. So we see this broad cultural shared culture of horses. But okay, I'm hearing you, Focus. That doesn't mean anything, independent development. Well, actually, it does. And that brings us to the beginning of the Indo-European expansion, where the Yamnaya expanded into Europe and mixed with native Neolithic cultures to create the corded ware culture. Sorry. Now, this used to be thought of as a conquest, chariot driving horse nomads storming into Europe and conquering. It's an idea that's loved by the aforementioned Folkis. And while some of that certainly did happen, it wasn't completely that. Specifically, studies have shown that when the Yamnaya culture came into areas, you had a much more diversity of how they mixed. Some stayed Neolithic herders. Some had high degrees of Yamnaya DNA. Some had low. Some even had DNA markers of the Afanassievo culture over in the far right. Now, it should be noted that the archaeologists think that those were more anomalies than anything, but it's still interesting. And what is also very interesting is that the Yamnaya came not from Europe, but from Central Asia. So the birth of the corded ware culture, which is itself is the birth of the Germanic and Celtic and eventually even Mycenaean Greek cultures, was a mixing of cultures. So this whole idea of art heathenry makes no sense at the very core and bones of it, because in the beginning of these cultures was a mix of cultures. So it makes no sense whatsoever to say we have to stay pure when we weren't even pure in the first fucking place. Why would we say stay pure when no one has ever been pure? Now, I could keep going and going into the past, but, again, how far do we say arch heathenry? Arch heathenry, ooh, it doesn't exist. Sorry, Focus. Go suck McNallen's and survive the Jive's dicks. It doesn't exist. Folkism isn't valid. Cultural mixing has existed since the beginning of heathenry itself, as far as we can go back into the archaeological record. And that concludes my video. Now, if you want me to cover any of these periods in a later video to a greater extent, let me know in the comments. And feel free to check out the three people that I mentioned in the beginning. And also please check out my first video that my co-host Ryan Dennis and I worked on. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the video.